And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of the Doing the Work podcast. As tonight, we will take a look at two more contenders in the Big Ten women's group tonight. Tonight, we'll be looking at Maryland and Nebraska. I am your host, Kathy Amos, along with my co-host here, Jeff Marlowe, on the Doing the Work podcast, the newest show on the Back Home Network that's dedicated to covering IU women's basketball. And as we do most of our shows, we start our show tonight with our banner moment. And tonight's banner moment occurred yesterday, October 18th, when the first official AP Top 25 poll came out and our landed the number 11 spot. This is the second time in a row landing a top 15 spot for our women's program after they were number 8 last year. And not only is this momentous for our own women's program, but for our school in general, because this is the first time ever that both the men and the women's program have both been ranked in the top 25 preseason. So the expectations are high for both programs, and this is just where we want them to be every year going forward. So I don't know about you, but is anyone else excited to get started and see how it all plays out? I know I am. A few other headlines, Jeff, we'll hit, and then I'll turn over to you for a couple things. But first, I should mention our banner moment tonight is, as always, sponsored by Home Field Apparel. Home Field is constantly releasing new schools or updating their products for schools already existing in their line. So you're bound to find something that's good for you or as a gift for a friend or family. And don't forget, holiday season, believe it or not, approaching pretty quickly. So it's a good time to go and check it out. And even if you have friends or family that aren't associated with a school or don't really have anything like that, they actually have a core line that doesn't have schools or teams associated with them. So take a look at that as well. It still gives you a high quality product, and it gives you something that maybe you're looking to be a little more neutral in what you're wearing. So go to homefieldapparel.com. And if it's your first time purchasing, you can use our promo code HOME, HOME, to get 15% off your first order. Again, that's HOME for 15% off. And the website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. So, Jeff, I'll hit these quick headlines and I'll kick it over to you to see what kind of thoughts you have. But the other ones we've had since our show last Wednesday, on Monday, there was an article on iuhoosiers.com about Chloe Moore McNeil. This was Chloe Moore McNeil. It was written by Pete DePremio. It was a really great article, and I think it just highlighted again for me what's really becoming a stronger and stronger feeling for me that Chloe is going to really jump into an even bigger role, talking once again about her focus on defense. And then just, I think today we had two people named to some preseason award watch lists. Sarah Scalia was named to the Ann Myers Drysdale watch list, which is for the best women's shooting guard. And Grace Berger was named to the Cheryl Miller watch list, which is for the best women's small forward. So with that, I think now a former girls high school basketball coach here to spread all of his basketball wisdom to both me and all of our great listeners. Let's send it over to Coach Marlowe for Coach's Corner. Jeff, what's on your mind tonight?
Well, you stole all mine. You not only did you switch up the banner moment on me, but then you took the one I thought we were going with, and you mentioned all that, the awards. So I don't have anything left, really.
I did a little last minute editing, like 10 minutes before we started. Surprise! Keeping you on your toes.
I will just say, I guess I will add on that the IU being number 11 is the second highest their preseason rank. They were number 8 last year, and this is now 58 consecutive weeks that IU has been in the AP top 25. Now I'm sure that's a record for Indiana, but it shows to a certain degree what Terry Morin and the program have built, that they are a consistently top 25 program. And I can't imagine them really falling out of the top 25 at any point this year, unless somebody, we have a rash of injuries that lead us into some type of really deep losing streak, because, you're going to lose the college game. You're going to lose 4 or 5 games a year just in the league. That's not going to drop this team out of the top 25. So it just, again, it shows more and more of what the Doing the Work podcast is here for, and that's to cover a top quality women's basketball team in the Indiana women.
Yep, absolutely, Coach. So anything else, or we can jump into the meat of our program tonight, which it's going to follow very much similar, I think, to what we did last week.
No, I think, and by the time we get here next week, I think we'll see they're kind of dribbling out these award watch list, one a day. I would imagine we will see Mackenzie Holmes on, I believe it's the Lisa Leslie award list, because that's for the centers.
Yep.
I'd be shocked if she's not on that top, that it's the top 20. So you start out with the preseason watch list of 20, and then they'll whittle it down throughout the year until they kind of get to like a final 5 or 6 toward the end of the year with that. So, but I can't think of anybody else. I was a little surprised about Scalia being in the top 20. I shouldn't have been when I really think about what she had done last year, but just because she's so new to our program, I wasn't thinking that way. Wasn't shocked about Grace, but I don't know if we'll see anybody else besides Mackenzie possibly on that list. And I would expect her to be on that. And like I said, I think that's the Lisa Leslie list.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But other than that, no, I'm ready to talk about Maryland and Nebraska.
All right. Well, let's just jump right in. So we'll kind of follow the same setup that we did last time. So I'll kind of go over what I could glean from different websites and looking at the rosters between last year and this year. And then I'll throw it over to you to kind of do a breakdown. So we'll start with Maryland on the previously mentioned AP's poll. They are currently ranked 17th in the nation, and they are picked 4th in both the coaches and media poll to finish in the Big Ten. In terms of players, they have a pretty small team just in general. 11 of their 13 players are listed as either guards or guard/forwards. So what I could read about them, they're really expected to rely more on their speed than really muscling and pushing people around maybe on the block. So that might be interesting when we can talk about matchups and how they might handle Mackenzie Holmes. And we've kind of talked about starting 5. This might be an interesting time where we have a smaller starting 5. But in terms of returning players, they have 2 main players that are returning. First is Diamond Miller. I think most people remember her. She will be a senior guard. She was on the All Big Ten first team both 2 years ago, and then on the second team last year. She missed a lot of games last year because she had a knee injury, but she still ended up averaging 13 points per game. And about 4 rebounds per game. And for this year, she is picked to be, she is on the preseason All Big Ten team. And then the other returning player of note would be Shane Sellers. For those of you, if you watched any of Maryland last year, she was the one that wore the prescription goggles that you don't see very much. So she kind of stands out. It's a really cool look. But she was a freshman last year, so she's only a sophomore coming into this year. She was the Big Ten 6th player of the year last year, and she also made the Big Ten freshman team. She did end up starting 12 games last year, and is expected probably to take a predominant starting role. She still averaged 26 minutes a game. And again, that's expected to go up. Kind of similar to us, but even more so, Maryland is relying a lot on transfers. And I'll talk a little bit later about, they are just quickly because they did lose Reese, Owusu, and Collins last year from their last team last year, all transferring or graduating. So they have 5 transfers coming in. So first, Lavender Briggs is from Florida. She's also another guard. She was on the All SEC second team as a sophomore last year. She averaged 12.5 points per game. She did suffer a foot injury in February of 2021, so that did slow her down some last year. One that I think IU fans probably, again, if you watched us in the NCAA tournament against Princeton, will remember Abby Myers. So Abby is originally from Maryland, and she's going to be a senior guard for them next year now. She was Ivy League Player of the Year last year, as well as, of course, then the first team All-Ivy and All-American honorable mention. She averaged just under 18 points per game and just under 6 rebounds per game. My favorite thing about her is just remembering her 29-point performance when they beat Kentucky in the NCAA tournament. So she is also expected to be one of the team's. And then just real quickly, the other transfers, they have Eliza Pinson from South Florida is a graduate student guard. Brene Alexander from Vanderbilt, another super senior guard, so using her 5th year there at Maryland. And then Allie Kubik from Towson, who is a junior forward. One of the few true forwards listed on the roster. Everyone else is pretty small. So that's a quick rundown of the roster. Anything, Jeff, there that you remember from last year or any of these players that you want to point out I haven't talked about?
Well, Diamond Miller's the real deal.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously she was hurt last year, and if she's healthy, she's the real deal. The girl that the Myers girl from Princeton that's coming in is a very good player. It will be interesting to see how she adapts into playing in the Big Ten a little bit. The Ivy is a little bit different competition level, but she showed against Kentucky and IU last year in the NCAA tournament that she could hang with Power 5 programs. So I think that will help them. I look at the roster, and I was more we talked about this early in the offseason, Kathy, and kind of in our text messaging back and forth with Ari and people that we do with, that there was something going on at Maryland. Either there was a real falling out between Coach Brenda Fries and a few of her players like Reese and Owusu, Collins. They lost a couple others. I think they had 5 transfers out. And everybody was at first kind of like, whoa, what's going on? And Maryland was, you were thinking maybe going to drop down into the bottom half of the league. Well, then she went out into the portal and got the kids that you mentioned and these players who are going to bring talent. Now, the one thing you look at, Diamond Miller coming off an injury, Briggs coming off an injury to a certain degree, even though it occurred in February 2021. Foot injuries are always, they're just so, you never know. To me, they almost become a career battle because you just never know. Think Pat Graham, from those people my age back in the 90s with IU men. As well. And then so you look at that kind of thing. So they do have some injury past issues there that you always going to kind of have in the back of your mind. But like I said, she went out and she found talent in the portal. Now, as you said, they're fairly small. And as I posted in the chat with the Workaholics, I really think you're going to see Maryland, and they played kind of up tempo anyway. I think you're going to see them play more like Iowa. I think you're going to see them really push the tempo, shoot more threes. They're not going to be as inside oriented as they may have been in the past. Now, I think that's going to hurt them against some of the better teams that have size. And we're going to talk about their schedule here in a few minutes. But and Britta Fries, I wonder about have to change their defensive philosophy. They were a team that switched basically everything 1 through 5. And that made it hard for teams to go against them because most teams in the women's game aren't capable of switching 1 through 5. And when you are, it really can hamper what teams do offensively. But with them losing as much size as they did and basically bringing in a bunch of guards and small forwards, I wonder if they can play that way. Now, what I'm more interested is rather than and more like maybe even an old Vegas type team, I'm looking to see if they pressure more and try to get up and pressure full court, make teams use up that 30-second shot clock as much in the back court or just getting across the timeline to where you don't have as much time to take advantage of their lack of size. So I'll be very interested to see what they look like when the season starts for them in about 20 days.
Yeah, absolutely. Another article I had read asked Coach Fries about what kind of playing philosophy, and she said they will definitely be a lot more positionless next year, or this year rather now. I mean, we're almost there, 2 weeks, Kathy, so not even. But she mentioned something about even potentially not just doing 4 out, 1 in, but even 5 out. I can see that. And you don't have a true center.
Yeah, which is something you're seeing a lot of in the high school game right now. Boys and girls here, especially in Indiana, a lot of 5 out, no traditional post players. Then you open up that middle of the lane for your basket cuts, your back cuts. You can screen away from it. There's all kinds of things you can do with it. I haven't seen as much of it at the college level because the college level tends to be a lot more dominated by dribble drive philosophy, even in the women's game. But it'll be very interesting to see what it looks like if she does play a true 5 out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest question for me with Maryland is probably similar to us. Now they have a pretty hefty turnover in their roster. How are they going to kind of fit all those pieces together again? So I think that's probably the biggest question. It's very different than when we highlighted Iowa and Ohio State last week, where it was a lot of the same players returning. Mm-hmm. Here, again, on paper, they look like they've definitely reloaded with their transfers. But again, you just never know how that chemistry is going to really all come together.
One kid to keep an eye on, Kathy, is actually an Indiana kid. I believe her first name is Milla, but Reynolds girl from South Bend, Washington, committed to them a couple of years ago. And she, at least in the high school game, was pretty much a true center. and had the ability to move out away from the post, but she's built like a center. So I would be interested to see if she gets some early run with them, especially if they feel like they need some size on the floor. So even though she wasn't one of the ones that you highlighted, and we really didn't highlight many of their incoming freshmen, but that'll be one with an Indiana connection. I'll be interested to kind of keep an eye on and see how much she plays out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Thanks. Anything else on the team itself, or do you want to jump over to the schedule?
I'll jump into the schedule here a little bit, and I'll go first. And I, at least on paper, I will say Maryland probably has the toughest schedule anybody in the Big Ten has.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll kind of go through it. And I really, obviously, our focus is on the Big Ten season, but we did talk a little bit about non-conference scheduling last week with Iowa and Ohio State.
They're non-conference.
Maryland's going to jump right into the battle. I mean, they're going to host number 1 South Carolina on November the 11th. That's their second game of the year. And South Carolina is the third year in a row, I believe, the preseason number 1. I believe.
Yes.
I should be defending national champion.
Yes.
Yeah, so, I'm trying to remember. All of a sudden, I've gone.
Yes.
I've gone all forgetful here. Yeah, and so I mean, so they're right. And so with all the turnover they had, that's a game where A, you can find out a lot about yourself, but B, it could get kind of ugly against a pretty good veteran South Carolina team. But that doesn't mean that's what the season is going to be for Maryland. That'll be the thing Brenda Freeze may have to deal with a little bit, is as she's trying to put the new puzzle pieces, as you talked about, together. There may be some games, and I'm not saying there are very many teams that are, South Carolina can do that to a lot of teams this year. They're in the top 10. So it's that's just something there. Then 9 days later, they go to Waco to play Baylor. All right. Now, Baylor may not be where they've been under Kim Mulkey, but this right now is still the class of the Big 12 for the most part.
Sure. Outside of Iowa State. Yep.
And then the game that really popped to me, because it's a little bit of a danger game. 5 days later in Fort Myers, they go over Thanksgiving for a tournament down to Fort Myers. Their first game is against a DePaul team that, even though DePaul may be a Big East team, and everybody kind of is like, oh, DePaul. Doug Bruno, very good coach, been there a long time at DePaul. This is the type of team that, will jump and bite you. DePaul has been a consistent tournament team throughout Doug Bruno's tenure. So I'll be kind of watching that game as well as we start getting toward the conference season in December. I'll be interested to see how that game plays out for Maryland against DePaul. And then they go into the challenge and they'll play in South Bend against Notre Dame, which will be kind of a homecoming game for the Reynolds girl. But again, Notre Dame's going to be, I didn't see all the preseason ranking, but I assume Notre Dame's in the top 10 or 15.
Number 9. Yep, they're number 9.
Right.
Yes, so far you have number 1, South Carolina, 18, Baylor, number 9, Notre Dame. Yeah, and it's just now December 1st.
And then they're kind of their non-conference, as far as the really good teams they're playing in the non-conference, they're going to finish up on December 11th hosting UConn. And so that's 5 games against elite top 10, 15. Well, DePaul may not be top 15, but to me, those are elite teams they're playing. So by the time they get to the grind of the conference season, I think we're going to know a lot about Maryland as we get into December and January.
Yeah, absolutely. You got by December 11th, they played 3 top 10 teams with South Carolina, Notre Dame, and UConn, and then number 18 Baylor in there as well.
And like I said, I have a lot of respect for Doug Bruno and what he's done at DePaul over the years. And so, like I said, to me, Maryland may end up winning that game. They may win it by 20, but I also seen DePaul step up and beat teams like that because everybody thinks, oh, how did DePaul win? Well, because Doug Bruno's a pretty darn good coach, and DePaul's had a pretty good program over the years. And then we kind of were talking about this a little bit back and forth last week with the other teams. You look at their Big Ten schedule. They play Iowa twice, Ohio State twice, Nebraska twice. I mean, that's the 4 teams besides Indiana that we're kind of talking about in the top 5. They play everybody twice except IU, and then they go on the road to play us. Right. So their schedule, not only non-conference, but they probably got the toughest road in the Big Ten. Their other double plays are Rutgers. You would think they'll win those 2, and Michigan State. Again, I think they'll beat Michigan State twice, but going to East Lansing isn't always the easiest game in the world. So
we can ask Michigan about that from last year.
and Michigan State was a little better than we think they're going to be last year than we think they're going to be this year. But I just think, when you look, especially these top contenders, Maryland may have not only the toughest schedule overall, but I think they really have a meat grinder in the Big Ten, and that may be what keeps them from possibly winning the title.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should mention too, even though Michigan's only a single play, they sneaked into the top 25 here in this first official poll that came out. So that's at least a single play for them at home.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so we got now 6 teams in the top 25 for
And then
the Big Ten. So
and I did write this one down. They go to Purdue as a single play. And
yes,
again, may not be
me
an
too.
easy game to win. I'm not saying they will lose it. I'm just saying these are not going to be easy places to play. So you think about some of their games that they're getting at home, as you mentioned, that they're singles at home. Yeah, they're getting some of the lower end teams, which will make it easier for them to win. But some of their tough games are the double plays or single games on the
Away.
road.
Yeah, I agree. Like you mentioned, they have us away. They also have Wisconsin away, Purdue away. And then their only single play home games are against at least number 25 Michigan, Illinois, Minnesota, and then Penn State. So yeah, they definitely did not get an easy draw with their schedule.
Now they also, Kathy, also put this out there. If it comes down to this, they finish the season on Friday, February 24th in Columbus against Ohio State. So they could be battling for the conference title, a share of the conference title, or teams like IU and Iowa that are going to play a couple days later, maybe watching that game to see how that impacts where they finish in the conference standing, whether it's a win, a tie, whatever. So that last weekend, those 4 teams, to me, I'm really looking forward to that. Obviously IU and Iowa, but that Nebraska or that Maryland Ohio State game could have huge ramifications on seeding in the Big Ten tournament.
Right. And a Friday at 6:00 at night. So
Yeah.
The other thing we covered, Jeff, last time was kind of talking about the last 6 games or so.
Yes.
So I'll actually start with 7 because so they start February 2nd at Iowa, February 5th at home against Ohio State, February 9th at Northwestern, then home against Illinois, then at Michigan State, home Iowa, and then as you already mentioned, at Ohio State. So what are your thoughts on that last 7 schedule for them? Because it doesn't feel real. I mean, it's not quite as brutal Indiana's last 6, but it's no cakewalks. I mean, it's right there.
I'm not sure it's not worse than IU's, Kathy. You're going to play Iowa twice and Ohio State twice.
Yeah.
In that segment. And the plus they get is Illinois is going to, everybody figures Illinois is going to be toward the bottom 2-3 of the league. Northwestern is going to be somewhere probably 8 through 11, somewhere in there. So you would think they're going to get a little bit of a respite there. But to me, you're going to play Iowa and Ohio State, basically 4 out of those 7.
Sure.
That's not an easy road.
Yeah, I still would make ours just a little harder, right? We also play Iowa twice, but we also have Purdue twice. Well, maybe not necessarily, if you look at Purdue in terms of where they're at in the standings, I think we all know that those games just are never easy. No. And, especially going to Purdue as well. And then we have Michigan buried in there too. So of our last 6 games, we don't have an Illinois on the schedule. No. So I would still give us a little bit of nod, but boy, they're right there as well with the way they close out conference.
That's for sure. And one thing I will say here, Brenda Fries has been through these battles before. She is a veteran coach, well-regarded coach, and has found ways to win with those teams. And, when they've been dominant, and at times when we kind of thought maybe they were about ready to not drop off, but, just weren't going to be a contender. I think Maryland, I think we get into those last 6-7 games, at least Maryland will be in the mix. Now, how those last 6-7 play out will determine where everybody finishes up. But I think we get into to me, when we get to February, I think you're going to see the 4 to 5 teams we're talking about toward the top.
I do too. I do feel like after looking more at those, 4 or 5 teams or whatever, a little more in depth with their schedule and rosters, I think it's going to be kind of a log jam there coming into February too, because it does feel like at least a number of the schools that we've looked at in terms of scheduling, a lot of their, heavier opponents are really weighted in that February timeframe. So I think it's going to be an exciting February.
Well, and with that, just like you pointed out, Kathy, IU and Iowa don't play at all until that stretch. Maryland and Iowa don't play at all until that stretch. Yep. Maryland and Ohio State don't play at all. So there's kind of that uniqueness there that and I don't know if the Big Ten did it on purpose or whether it just shook out that way. But I think that will help explain some of that logjam, because they're all going to be kind of beaten up on the bottom half of the league until those last 6-7 games of the season. That's when they're going to start playing each other and starting to get a little separation possibly.
Yep, absolutely. So any other last thoughts on Maryland before we move on to Nebraska? Again, our biggest question, was there really a problem with the team that we saw the transfers out, and how did those new transfers kind of fit in then? And if they can right the ship if they needed to. We don't know,
No,
obviously.
we'll find out. But I don't have anything else. I really felt like we covered Maryland pretty well.
Yes. Well, good. With a nice segue then to Nebraska. So I'll kick us off here. So Nebraska came out as ranked number 22. They are picked preseason by the media to finish fifth in the Big Ten. Michigan was picked fifth in the Big Ten by the coaches poll. So a little interesting difference of opinion there. So they returned their top 3 scorers from last year. I should just start off and also mention, though, that they had Sam Habe from last year was expected to be a major contributor again this year. She was, I believe, second on the team in scoring last year. She suffered a leg injury in practice earlier this year. This offseason, and she is going to be out for the entire season. So it will be interesting to see how they can be able to retool and move forward without her now. But they do still, even without Sam, they still return top 3 scorers from last year. So they have Jazz Shelley, who is a starter. She is a guard. She transferred in from Oregon last year, where she had played 2 years prior to that. So last year she made the second team All Big Ten, and she was also on the All Big Ten defensive team last year. Interesting as well for Jazz is that she shot just under 41% from 3, and she averaged 13 points per game. Including over her last 6 games, she averaged 19 points per game. So she was really heating up at the end of last year. Another starter, so they do return 4 starters from last year. So Alexis Markowski is a sophomore center. She was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year last year and made second team All Big Ten. She is picked on the preseason All Big Ten team right now. She was second last year. I'm sorry, so I misspoke. Sam was not. She was second on the team in scoring last year at just under 13 points per game, and she led the team in rebounding at 8 rebounds per game. So clearly, she's going to be the force down low for them. Isabel Bourne, also a starter, is a forward. She's was All Big Ten honorable mention last year. She shot just under 52% from field goal. The interesting thing for her, she is going into her 4th year. She has 843 career points, and they're expecting that she will crack that 1,000 point club this year and become the 36th Husker to do so. The last starter that's coming back is a sophomore, Allison Widener. She averaged around 7 points per game. So in addition to the folks coming back, Maddie Krull is a transfer from South Dakota. This will be her 3rd year playing. She's a guard. She was a 2-year starter at South Dakota and averaged around 7 points per game. They're expecting her to actually contribute more on the defensive side than so much on the offensive side. Obviously, reading through some of the stats of the coming back starters, they have a lot of points there. So they might be focusing her more on defense. And then we didn't talk about freshmen for Maryland, but I did find one for Nebraska that was interesting. Maddie Mandelson. She was a top 35 recruit from Utah. She actually reclassified so she could come to school. And she's actually was a top 5 volleyball player. So she's a double sports participant for her. So they did lose a couple folks to transfers, a couple of their scorers. One person that started 25 games, Ashley Scugan, and Bella Cravens, who started 15 games. So they did have other people that started as well that left the program. So overall, though, pretty much a lot of people coming back. The big question for me is how they'll fill the hole for Sam Habe not being able to play with her injury. So a lot of really good experience, and a lot of those people that are coming back are 4 or 5 year players as well. So pretty veteran squad for Nebraska.
Yeah, I will be interested about Mendelson, whether, because Nebraska's volleyball program is elite,
Yep.
And so I wonder how that's going to work out for them with that, because I can't imagine she's spending a lot of time in preseason basketball practice right now.
Right.
But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know how they work that out with her. The other thing I'll point out here is, to me, Haby's a big loss. I'm not saying
Yeah.
it's going to take them down into the 7th or 8th place in the standings, but she's such a veteran presence, and she was kind of a glue type player for them. She just did a little bit of everything, and she just had a calming presence on the floor. The one that really we struggled with last year was Markowski as a freshman, and part of that was because Mac did not play either game.
Yeah.
Against Nebraska, and they really kind of exploited that matchup in Lincoln the second time around. First time, I think they kind of got caught. I don't think it got announced till that morning that Mac wasn't playing against Nebraska, so they probably didn't have time to prepare. But in the game in Lincoln, Markowski played well, and they really, and again, another game where we really struggled with inside game and rebounding in that game on the road.
I don't think we could shoot that game either. I think it just wasn't quite clicking for us.
Yeah. So, but Nebraska, I don't think has enough talent, especially without Haby, to move into a top 2, maybe even 3, but I think they're going to be right there in that 4-5 mix. I think they'll need a look to catch some breaks, but I can very easily see them being 5th and making the tournament. And with Haby, if Haby was healthy, I could see them being, I'm still not sure they're quite a top level contender for the Big Ten title, but Lincoln is becoming a tough place to play. They beat Michigan there last year. They beat, if I remember right, they beat Iowa in Lincoln last year. They beat us in Lincoln. So it's becoming a place that you really don't want to go to. And so I think they could have gotten into a top 3, top 4 of the league. Now I think they're going to be right there. I think they're solidly in 5th. And if they get to higher than that, they'll surprise me a little bit, and I'll be happy to come on here at the end of the year and say I was wrong about that.
Right.
But I think that Haby injury really is going to keep them from being able to make that next step up. But I think they make the tournament, and I think they can win a round or 2 in the tournament.
Yeah, I can see that. The other thing I kind of see from Nebraska, a little bit similar to last year, I think they could be a spoiler for teams that maybe, to your point, are underestimating them going into Lincoln. And for those of us, maybe for our listeners, if you didn't watch the women's team in Lincoln last year, maybe flip them on sometime this year, because their environment for the women's team is a little different than you might see on the men's side. They definitely have a lot more raucous crowd than they do right now, at least for their men's program. So don't kind of equate the two when we're saying they have quite the home field or home advantage there, because I that's what I'm kind of expecting from Nebraska. Same as you. I maybe 4 if things really break the right way for them.
Right.
But I think they're going to be more of a spoiler for people not watching and paying attention to them.
So you look at their schedule now. Of the teams we've talked about, they may have the easiest non-conference schedule.
Yes.
And I wonder if this will come back to hurt them a little bit when they make the tournament in terms of their net and where they may get seeded. They play Creighton. And the only reason I'm kind of throwing Creighton on here is because Creighton beat Iowa last year.
And they're number 21, actually.
And they are number 21. But again, it's a game that it's kind of a traditional rivalry game. But it's at Creighton.
And
it's on the road in Omaha at Creighton. And then they go to Puerto Rico over Thanksgiving, and they will play Mississippi State in their second game down there. And to me, and I did highlight Virginia Tech in the challenge. But I really thought for only 2 I really thought were tough games for them in the non-conference was Creighton and Mississippi State.
That's interesting. I thought I put Virginia Tech down. I mean, because they're ranked 13th right now, and that's on the road.
Yeah, I guess I was overlooking Virginia Tech then because I just don't think of Virginia Tech as one of those kind of the elite teams in the ACC. But
I didn't either until the rankings came out, and I'm like, gosh, I feel like that sounds familiar. So I went and looked it up, and I was putting my notes together last night.
Well, then let's throw them on there. Well, I highlight, I can throw them in. But again, other than that, that's the only 3 tough games I see in the non-conference for them. Their other non-conference games are
Kansas,
Washburn's exit, Omaha, Houston Christian, Drake on the road at Drake, but still, Drake, Tarleton, Texas A&M, Corpus Christi down in Puerto Rico, Samford, Wyoming, and Kansas are their other non-conference games. So, I just, those were the 3 I would highlight as tough games for them. And one's on the, and 2 are on the road and one's in a tournament. So they're not getting any real tough games at home, but I would expect them to run the table in most of those other games.
Yeah, I would too. The women's program for Kansas isn't
Mm-mm.
very strong, right? Okay, I wanted to make sure I wasn't
Mid-level
misremembering.
at best, I
Yeah.
think, in the Big 12. Um,
Okay.
and then you look at the Big 10 schedule, and to a certain degree, their doubles pretty competitive because they play Iowa twice, Maryland twice, Michigan twice.
Mhm.
But then they also get Northwestern and Illinois twice. So in my opinion, they ought to be basically 4-0 in those
Pretty
4 games.
balanced.
And
Yeah.
then you just find a way to split maybe the other three if you can. Their singles that I highlighted, they're at IU, they're home with Ohio State, and then at Purdue. Then their other singles are basically against the bottom half, all against teams that we figure are going to be in the bottom half of the league. But no favors for them from the standpoint of Iowa, Maryland, Michigan as their doubles, and then at IU and at Purdue. They're only really true. Their only single home game with one of the top level contenders is Ohio State.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I felt that theirs was probably a little more balanced than some of the other schedules we've been looking
Yeah,
at,
that's a good word.
for
That's a good word
conference.
for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Same thing. You want me to run down the last 6 and then you can break down? So,
Yeah, go ahead.
all right, I'm kind of backwards. Okay, so
Yeah.
starting February 9th, they are home against Illinois, then at Michigan, at Minnesota, home against Iowa, at Illinois, and then home against Northwestern. So that's basically their February schedule.
And outside of Iowa and Michigan, not a contender in the bunch. And they only play
Exactly.
them
Very
once.
different.
They play Illinois twice. If you go back 7 games, if you go back to the February 6th game, they're going to play Northwestern twice. So out of their last 7, they're going to play Northwestern twice, Illinois twice. Those are the games I think they ought to be 4-0 in. And then at home with Iowa in that stretch. So they're going to be at Iowa earlier in January, but they'll be at home with Iowa, which again, we just said already, we think they could be a spoiler in this whole thing. And then they do go to Michigan. And so again, I think schedule wise, like you said, for them, it's a balanced schedule, but I just don't think it's as tough as some of the teams we've talked about. I don't think it's the last 6 or 7 games that IU or Maryland have. I think it's tough as overall as maybe Maryland has in the Big Ten or IU. We talked a little bit about last week. I think we both kind of felt that Iowa had a little bit of an easier schedule than Ohio State, but those top 3 or 4, kind of all in that same boat. And Nebraska maybe not quite as tough, but I just don't think they can win some of those games on the road that you're going to need to if you want to be, like you said, jump up into a top 3. I think 4 if they're lucky. I have them slotted in at 5th here.
Right. Yeah. The only thing that might help push them into that 4 versus a 5 again is like we haven't gotten into Michigan or looked at their schedule.
No.
Who I would think that might be who is battling for that 4th, 5th position between those 2 teams. They do have an easier schedule down the stretch. So maybe if the fatigue is setting in, and again, not knowing what Michigan's schedule looks like down the road, that's where this schedule I think could play in their favor. So it is definitely, if you compare it to any of the other teams we've looked at so far, the easier February schedule, I think, of the bunch that we've looked at of the 5 teams.
But they're also playing teams like Maryland and IU and Purdue a little bit earlier in the season than some of the other teams we've talked about. So, and I think right now,
it could be bad. You just never know.
I'm one of those. I'm going to go and say I think IU is going to win the Big Ten. Of course, I'm on the show. I better say that, shouldn't I? But I really think it comes down to IU, Iowa, Ohio State. Those 3. I think Maryland can be in that. It can be in the mix. But I think when it all shakes out, they'll end up being about 3rd or 4th. And then you throw in, to me, from 4 through 6, 4 through 7, you're looking at, or let's say 4 through 6. I think you're looking at, or 7. I'll say 7. I can't do numbers in my head. I'm kind of doing this, I think, rather than having notes on this. So then you throw in. So if Maryland's 4th, then let's go 5th through 7th is probably Nebraska, Purdue, Michigan. All right. So so those 3 teams try and battle in there to maybe get 5th, and if they're lucky, up to 4th.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of where I have it too. In terms of order, I don't think I'll order them, but yeah, same. If we're doing segments of teams, top 3, I agree. Iowa, Ohio State, Indiana, and then right on the heels there, you never know with Maryland. Again, Brenda Freese is a good coach and how she gets them playing. And then Nebraska, Purdue, and Michigan. Sorry, my brain just blanked
Yeah,
too.
that
So.
was the same thing.
I shouldn't have. So basically, I think we're right. Maybe slightly different order, whatever. So, anything after you've now done a little deeper look into these two teams, Jeff, that has changed your mind or opened additional questions for what that Big Ten race will look like among the top five? Because now we've covered 5 teams, right? Indiana, Iowa, Ohio State, now Maryland and Nebraska. Those top 5, have anything changed your mind about them or opened any more questions for you on them?
I don't think anything's really changed my mind as much as we really dug into this over the last couple of weeks, Kathy, and we did a little bit with, I think with Amanda when we did the preview of the IU schedule. That last 6-7 games for so many of these teams, I don't think we're really going to know where the conference is until we get to February. And what I mean by that is I think those teams are going to take care of business against, as Ari's pointing out in the chat here with the Workaholics, the bottom 7 is expected to be really a big gap between the top 7 and the bottom 7. There's not really a group in the middle, and so, but IU, like I said, doesn't play Iowa until that last stretch. We just got done talking about Maryland doesn't play Iowa or Ohio State till that last stretch. We talked about, so I think we're really, I think you're going to see 3-4 teams toward the top of the Big Ten standings. They may be, so 18 games, they may be 10-1, 10-2 going into that stretch. And 3 or 4 teams really kind of locked, and everybody's going, what a great. And then by the time we're done, it obviously will shake out, but I still think it's going down. I still think it will come down to the last weekend.
Yeah, I do too. I absolutely, like I mentioned, earlier on the show tonight, I think there's going to be a total logjam up at the top 3-4 teams going into February, and then we'll start to see some separations there. And I think it's going to a lot boil down to 2 things in my mind. How healthy teams stay, which is always the case, but not just for 1 or 2 games, but really going into that stretch. And if they can really then, number 2, gel together. Some of these teams, Iowa, we know what we're getting. Some of them, us, Maryland, with a lot of transfers, maybe not. And maybe by February, they really got it clicking. And that's maybe a good time to be playing your harder teams is in that February timeframe. So it could work out more in our favor if, it's just taking the team a little bit of time to gel. So those are just some overarching thoughts I had. But anything else you want to talk about with those?
Well, I'll build off of that in terms of what I think with that is that I don't think we're going to see any of these things like we saw last year. I don't think we'll see teams get shut down for a week or 2. I think we've gotten past that. Just by what we've seen in other sports. I don't think we're,
like
if somebody gets, somebody gets sick, they'll quarantine a player. They won't quarantine a whole team anymore. So you don't have that issue of like IU trying to play 6 games in 12 days again. But I do think when it comes down to those last 6-7, no matter who you're playing, to a certain degree, how many days of rest do you get? And, for example, do you get 2 days or do you get 3 days? And so not only when you play them and where you play them, but kind of where it's coming on the calendar cycle in terms of how many days of rest are you getting. And I would imagine, we talked a little bit with Grace Berger about this. Actually, a couple different times I talked with Grace Berger about this last year on the Grace Berger Show, where, Coach Morin was always really good about trying to get them a day off right after a game. Like, so if they played on Tuesday, they wouldn't practice on Wednesday. Now, I still watch film, they do that stuff, but they wouldn't really get in and do a full-blown practice. But, but that gets a little harder to do when, and Grace said they still did it. So obviously they did, but when you're kind of in that crunch time of every 2 to 3 days or 4 days that you're playing, I didn't look at one of the things maybe we should have looked at, and I didn't in terms of scheduling, is there's always, for the Big Ten teams, there's a spot in there where they get about a week off. They play a game and then they're off for about 6, 7, 8 days. And
I just looked at ours, Jeff. Ours comes at the end. For February 19th, we play Purdue, and then we don't play again until we play at Iowa to end the season on the 26th.
and exactly that's what I'm getting at, Kathy. That could be huge if we are going to Iowa with a chance to win it outright or to get a share, to be fresh, coming off of that, to have a week's rest when they're probably going to be coming off a game 2, 3, 4 days beforehand. That could be huge. Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Well, I think that concludes the meat of our program, unless you had any other things you've thought of that you want to throw in.
No, right, I don't have anything else, Kathy. I love talking schedules. As a former coach, I love breaking down schedules. I love kind of breaking, film breakdown was always kind of my favorite thing.
Uh-huh.
But looking at schedules, one of the things I used to enjoy, and people probably think I'm nuts, was sitting down about this time of year when I'd start working out my scouting schedule. And so I always like looking at schedules and figuring out, where people are playing. But this Big Ten season, and this kind of lead us into talking about next week's guest with Kyle Huseman from Hawkeye Report, to kind of look at the Big Ten as a whole. And I just think this is going to be one heck of an exciting Big Ten season.
Yeah, absolutely. I do too. I absolutely agree. So, all right, we'll head into our final segment here, which is some questions from our listeners. We only have one this week. So on Twitter, Sarcastic Mike, he asked us, how would you like to see the point guard minutes divided up this year? Even Nikki last year didn't play 100% point guard at the time when she was on the court, and she wasn't always on the court. Do you see an 80-20 split, or is it being more evenly spread around over 4 or 5 players? So, Jeff, I'll let you answer that first. And what are your thoughts on point guard play this year?
Well, I've talked about this on a couple episodes, and thanks, Sarcastic Mike, for the question. I hope you're listening to our episode. If you're not watching here on the live YouTube feed, I've talked about it. I think you're going to see Grace Berger play some of this. I think it'll be divided over 3 or 4 players. I think you will see Grace Berger get some minutes as what I would refer to as kind of the old point forward Don Nelson used to use with the Bucks or even the Warriors. I would also say that I think we'll see Yarden Garzon playing here at this spot. I would not be surprised to see Yarden playing a lot more as we get to middle to later in the season at this spot. I think Sydney Parrish can handle this spot in short term. Chloe
what about
could even.
Sarah? Do you think Sarah can?
I was getting ready to go there, and
you
Sarah
think of her
Scalia
more of a shooting guard, but yeah.
And Sarah Scalia can play this spot. So I think you'll see it much more split over 4 to 3, 4, maybe even up to 5 players. But there will not be, I don't think, a traditional the way we thought of it with Nikki Cardano-Hillary as kind of that point guard. And as you pointed out, Allie was still around, and Allie could do some things with the ball as a point guard. Even though she wasn't designated as the point guard a lot of times. But I think you'll see by the middle of the season to end of the season, if the things we're hearing, and again, I only hear them secondhand, but there's a lot of buzz about Garzon coming out of the camp. And I will not be shocked if she's getting some big minutes by the middle of the season. And when I say big minutes, I'm talking, 18 to 20 minutes a game.
Yeah, I that's kind of where my head went when I read this question too. I think so. To answer his last question, do I see an 80-20 split or more spread evenly over multiple players? I think for me, I'm more of the multiple players. I don't necessarily think that we're going to see the ball handled by one person every time down the floor. So I think it will definitely be less traditional, and at least in our minds of what we historically think of point guards. So. Anything else on that question for you?
No, but like I said, I think it'll be interesting to see what Terry Morin does do with it, because outside of Garzon, I don't know if there is a true type of point guard on the roster anyway. I'm not even sure Caitlin Peterson really qualifies as a true point guard.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, let's talk some programming info, Jeff, and then I'll turn it right back to you for any last moment thoughts so you can have some time to gather yourself here. But let's talk about programming info, everyone. So Jeff just alluded to this. Next Wednesday, Jeff and I will be back again at the same time, so 8 Eastern, 7 Central. Next week, we will have a special guest. So his name is Kyle Huseman. He will be joining us. He writes for the Hawkeye Report. So if you haven't figured out what that is, he is the writer for Iowa Sports. So if you still have any lingering questions about Iowa that you want to throw at his way, please shoot us a message if you're on our private community inside that community, or hit us up on Twitter. Speaking of Twitter, Jeff is keeping us updated about all of our Hoosier alums that are playing out in the professional realms, both inside our community and out on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter at DTWIUWBB. That's a mouthful. So if you can't remember that, you can just search for Doing the Work with spaces in between on Twitter, and you should be able to find us. You can also go out to Simply Call community page and join our private community there. We talk not just men's basketball there. As mentioned, we have women's basketball. We have football stuff going on. Ari does a nice job covering all kinds of sports, soccer, quite often. So if you haven't joined us, I think it's well worth the money that is about, I think, $5 or $6 a month. I can't remember, but go out to the Simply Call page and you'll find it. Speaking of Assembly Call Radio is scheduled for their regular show tomorrow at 9 Eastern, 8 Central. And if you haven't had enough of Jeff and I will be making a special guest appearance tomorrow night on the show to do a crossover segment with the Assembly Call guys. So hopefully you can join us tomorrow night as well. Okay, Jeff, with that, it is time for last call. What lingering thoughts do you want to leave us with tonight?
Oh, well, I need to start coming up with like some philosophical, profound type things I could leave the audience with to think about for the next week. But no, a couple of things. I want to say that for those who've been following the community on Twitter with the updates, there was just something I kind of started thinking about with the kids that graduated or left after last year of the program. And when I say left, they graduated, whatever phrase you want to give it, but didn't want to come back for their COVID year. Alexa Golbey and Nikki Cardano-Hillary. And then I started thinking Amanda Cahill's been playing over in Europe for a handful of years, and she's having a really good season. She's with a team in Luxembourg. Her team is residents, and she's averaging over 20 a game and putting up some decent numbers. And then we were told last week, I think maybe Richie told us in the chat last week that Tyra Buss was playing again. And I'm not sure if Tyra had played since graduating. I thought she'd went pretty much straight into some coaching, and I'm not sure she'd played anything since graduating, but she's playing now in Lithuania, and she scored 20 points in her first game over there. And part of the reason she's in Lithuania now is she got married over the summer. I still refer to her as Tyra Buss, so everybody will know who I'm talking about, but she is Tyra Davison now. But interesting, at least on the European page, she still is still listing her as Tyra Buss. So it was pretty easy to find her. And then, but he's playing in Lithuania. So, but I did read an article earlier before she played her first game, where she was talking about it is a little bit of a struggle because some of the players speak English, but the coaching staff doesn't seem to be speaking any English. So she's she's kind of gotten thrown into and she doesn't know much Lithuanian. So
I bet not.
and so, but then I'm not quite sure. Nicole Cardano-Hillary has played all 3 games, gotten a few minutes here and there. Now, Alexa didn't play the last game for her team, and it's hard to find news, and sometimes it takes a day or so for the scores to actually update. You'll see who wins and loses, but there's no stats or anything. So Alexa didn't play in the last game, so I don't know whether maybe she had an illness, an injury, but she didn't play in that last game for her team. So again, it's just something I thought would be fun for the people in the community and then Twitter feed to kind of follow along, since we really kind of got invested, especially with Alexa and Nikki, even on this show, as we were talking about the team. But I also want to point out where I'm really excited, and Kathy's excited too, about Kyle, because this is really going to be the first time we've kind of gone outside of our kind of Hoosier network that we've had access to, whether it's the Assembly Call guys or Amanda Foster, Austin Render, Seth Tao, people who cover IU. We're actually kind of going out. Kyle is one of the writers for the Iowa Rivals site, and he covers women's basketball. And so obviously, again, like Kathy said, post your questions about Iowa women, but also the Big Ten in general, because he's seen the other teams in the Big Ten team, as well as he covers the Iowa women. So just a little bit different perspective. And like I said, we're excited to be, kind of bringing in somebody that we haven't talked with before from outside of kind of the Hoosier family. And see, and so for us, it's kind of an exciting thing here on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you just go and search for Hawkeye Report, you'll be able to find Kyle Huseman's his work out there and give it a read if you have some time before we talk with him next week. But Jeff, I think with that, we can probably go ahead and wrap it up, unless you have anything else that's come into your brain.
Nope. Just want to thank everybody who continues to listen. One thing, maybe Kathy, I know a few people on Twitter seen it. At some point, we're going to be kind of spun off into our own feed on podcast, with the Doing the Work. It won't be found under the Assembly Call banner per se, but we'll still be part of the Back Home Network. But it's kind of exciting for us to get our own, as we haven't quite got there yet, but just to give you guys a heads up that that it's coming, that we'll kind of have our own Doing the Work podcast feed that you'll be able to listen to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to reiterate that without folks here in our chat mob or listening later within whatever podcast feed of your choice or rewatching on YouTube, I just want to say thanks, because this is not, again, this isn't Jeff and I, our profession, we do it just because we love Indiana women's basketball and we want other people to just know more about them. And so we love to spread the word. And without you here, there's really no purpose. It would just be Jeff and I chatting with each other. So this has been a lot of fun for me as well. A special thanks to as well to my husband. He's been a great supporter. He's probably listening right now. So thanks to Sean. He's just been fantastic, giving me time and doing some of the other household duties that normally we split. So he's been taking a lot more duties so that I can do this with Jeff and make sure we're prepared for all of you. And also a big thanks to Ari, who's in the chat, and Jared from Assembly Call for supporting us and getting us up and running. So anyway, keep an eye on our Twitter feed. As soon as we know that podcast feed will be split out, and we'll make sure you can still find us. But that will probably be our main form of communication. But if you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, be sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is still youtube.com/assemblycall. You can also sign up for the free IU Hoops email newsletter, where they also cover some women's stuff and, again, other sports that comes out every Sunday. You can go do that at join.assemblycall.com. A special huge thanks to John Ringer of Riggs Design for designing our new logo. You can see we have another new one up in the corner of the YouTube feed if you're watching, and it's all over our Twitter account. So huge thanks to John. But again, just reiterating, thanks to all of you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU Hoops and other Big Ten and Iowa hoops again next week on Wednesday. So until then, keep your eyes in, your elbows on the rim. Yeah, your elbow. I'm going to try that again. Until then, keep your elbow in, your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Good night, everybody.
I'm not sure how you keep your eyes in and your elbows on the rim, but that would be interesting to see.
But that was something I would do.
I'm even looking right at the words on my sheet, and I still mess it up.
Yeah, that's one of those things. I need to figure out a way to have my notes like in front of me instead of always kind of looking down. I'm sure the people on the YouTube feed are like, he's always looking down. That's where my notes are. I need to have a way to either get a bigger table or get some way I can hang them up like in front of me. Mine
are all electronic, and I have 3 screens right now, and that's the benefit of working from home. And Sean worked from home. My husband worked from home all through COVID. So for like 18 months, this was his setup down here. And so I actually could have 4 monitors. I don't know how he does that.
I should.
So that's the benefit of having a desk job, and I still work from home. So I'm used to having things on multiple screens. So
I should try that because my wife has another computer in here. I just always use my Mac, and I don't want to have a kind of a split screen where I'm half the screen with you and then half screen with something else. Because again, my Wi-Fi is not bad. It's not bad, but there have been times, as you know, where it's kind of the video's kind of frozen up on me. And so I've always felt like that the more I put in up on the screen or have running, the more I run that risk. So, but I'll have to maybe try that. So try my wife's computer because it's right over. It actually sits right behind where I set up, and I could probably see that well enough that I could read the run sheet without having to always be looking down at it and stuff. So anyway, so hey, great show, Kathy. I loved it tonight. Yeah. I really, in these last 2 weeks, kind of, first of all, it wets the whistle of getting ready for IU women's basketball. It also gets us, and obviously we're here to talk about IU women's basketball, but it is kind of fun to look at the league as a whole. Something we didn't get to do last year because we kind of started this after the season had begun. It was about this time a year ago, I think, that you and I were having this discussion on an AC radio chat mob that, we were kind of like, hey, let's do something like this.
Fun. Let's try it.
Let's try that. And so, and Jared, as you said, got us, Jared and Scott and Galen all have been very helpful to help us get set up. Brian Tonsoni and Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips have all been very helpful in helping spread the word. But we also, we hope the people who are listening, the people who are watching will help us spread the word. But we're kind of hoping maybe that having somebody like Kyle on will help spread the word among, people that, we're hoping he'll spread the word a little bit to people that follow him on Twitter. And, we can get there because we're having fun with it. And tonight, good show, Kathy. I really like this because you kind of focused on the players.
Yeah,
I was focused more on the schedule. Which is, like I said, that was where I liked that part of it when I was coaching. I kind of liked looking at that kind of nitty gritty type stuff when I was coaching. So yeah, it did work out perfectly. So did.
All right. Well, let me end the broadcast. Yeah, we'll be back next week. Thanks to everyone.
In the pod. Thanks everybody, and we'll stick around. We got a couple things to talk about.
Absolutely. All right. Good night, all.
See you guys.